Hello, this is Professor JPS, and this is a streamlined video lecture for Communication Arts 101 Sections 1 and Sections 2. For those of you in Section 1, that's Monday, Wednesday, 10 to 11:20, and for those of you in Section 2, that's Tuesday evening, 5:30 to 8:25. Since both your classes are now on the same page, so to speak, going over the same material in the syllabus, on the syllabus, this streamlined lecture this evening will count for both sections. I think that's what we've been doing for the past couple of lectures. So this evening, this is late Saturday evening into Sunday morning, this would have been the lecture for Com Arts 101 for Monday, April 20th, and Tuesday for April 21st, I believe. Is that right? 17th is yesterday, 18th is today, 19th. Yeah, 20th and 21st on your syllabus. It will be 20th and 21st. And it's for the introduction to Chapter 6, pages 157 through 167. So that's not a lot of pages, but there are a decent amount of material I'd like to go over this evening to discuss the idea of what this chapter, the preface to Chapter 6 is about. It's about conglomeration, okay? That is to say, how it is that we understand what a media conglomerate is. Now, in the very first class, for each of your classes, I talked about media consolidation. I talked about in the last, well, really the last 25 to 30 years, there's been a very, very increase in consolidation of media. That is to say, fewer and fewer media companies actually exist and control more and more of the popular culture and ultimately public opinion. You may remember in the very first class of the semester, I talked about television news, right? I talked about just a little experiment, a little thought experiment about television news and where we stood with television news and how it is that we're informed by television news. You may remember I talked about ABC, which is Channel 7 out of New York, CBS, which is Channel 2, NBC, which is Channel 4. Then talked a little bit about PBS, so that's a different category, and that's Channel 13 out of New York. And then I talked about CNN, MSNBC, and then talked about Fox News, okay? And then other versions of local news, okay? Now, again, back then in beginning of or end of January, I was discussing the idea that, you guys are 19, 20, 21 years old, or whatever, and you no longer really get your news from those news sources. To the degree in which you guys get your news, it's usually some sort of digital media platform that you get your news from, or at least your news, bits of your news from. But I went on to mention that television news is still a relatively important idea because still much of the country gets their news from television. And television is on, particularly with cable television, it's on 24/7. So whatever makes the media news narrative is really cemented with television over and over and over again in a given news cycle. It's really still pushed by television. And then I talked a little bit about the idea that news in general, the public thinks of it as something that's just sort of occurring naturally on the television. Of course, we know it's produced by actual people, actual reporters, actual editors, and people who are, responsible for the technical work of it with cameras and lights and microphones and all the rest. But we very rarely think about the actual ideas behind what becomes newsworthy, what becomes chosen as news, and what is ignored by the news media. And what I tried to talk about in the very first class was the idea that you should also think about how the news, particularly television news, is owned, that it's a private enterprise, that it's a money-making, for-profit business. So I wanted to talk not so much about political bias in news, but I wanted to talk about the kind of economic apparatus that is news. And that's what we talked about in the very first class, right? So for instance, you may remember we were talking about the idea that there are a bunch of people who work for ABC News and NBC News and CBS News and Fox News and MSNBC News and CNN News. And all those people who work for those news entities, they have some political opinions themselves based upon their own experiences and their own ideas and their own thoughts about the world. But I wanted to be clear to you guys that it wasn't just their opinions that mattered. Because all of those people who work for all of those news stations, you must understand and remember that all those news stations are owned by a large media company known as a conglomerate, right? So just in a simple understanding, ABC is owned by Disney. It's owned by the Disney Corporation, right? So every night at 6:30, ABC here in New York, in the New York market in Connecticut, we're so close to New York, we're in the New York market. You have television news come on ABC, and the general public doesn't necessarily realize that ABC is owned by Disney. So if there's news about Disney that's negative or not good or problematic or about one of Disney's competitors, it may or may not necessarily make the ABC News that night. In other words, the news is filtered through who owns the news and how it affects them first, not how it affects you or me or your neighbor or your friend. NBC is owned by Comcast, which is a very large cable company, and in part owned by Universal, which is another media company. CBS is owned by a company called Viacom. Viacom also owns MTV. It also owns Paramount Pictures. It also owns many other sources of media. You can understand the media landscape is really, really filled with a number of companies that are all held very closely by large media corporations. Okay, MSNBC is partly owned by Comcast and NBC itself. Fox News is owned by something called the News Corporation, which is a very, very powerful news corporation that owns lots of newspapers and websites and broadcasting all over the world. And when you own that many newspapers, and when you own that many news stations, and when you own that many websites, you control public opinion, or at least you attempt to control public opinion. And I think that if you look carefully at Fox News, particularly in the way in which they represent particularly conservative stances over and over and over again, that they convince a lot of the public of conservative viewpoints as opposed to, say, liberal viewpoints. Now, they can do whatever they want, right? It's a free country, and they have the First Amendment right to do so. But I don't think people think of the news that way. They think if it's on the news, it must be true. Maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. It's up to us to be more media savvy and to be more to have a greater degree of critical thinking about the news media. And I just want to explore this in our second to last chapter in a number of ways, and how conglomerates work and how they get themselves to be so very powerful. So powerful that the general public doesn't even realize it. They don't even realize how it is that not only is the news in the hands of very few people, but the entire popular culture is really in the hands of very few people in terms of commercial media. Okay, it's a lot of power to have under the auspices of only 5 or 6 corporations. Okay, so if you remember some of that stuff from the very first day, you can look back in your notes to double check. Okay, it was not in the textbook. We waited till nearly the end of the semester to discuss it further in the textbook. The beginning or preface to chapter 6 talks about this idea of conglomerates, okay? And they list 5 aspects of contemporary media conglomerates and what it is media conglomerates need to do to remain competitive and to have that very, very strong hold on a corporate strategy that tries to reach as many people as possible and also control public opinion and control what becomes popularized, what becomes sellable in the culture, to then keep doing it, to keep making a lot of money, okay? Now, on page 158, Joseph Tural, the textbook author, talks about the 5 things that are most important in contemporary and future media conglomerates. Number 1 on their list is the spread of digital media. Number 1, the spread of digital media. Now, I don't need to really explain what digital media is. You live it every day. You've lived it every day since probably about 7th or 8th grade. But, this is a 101 class, so let me read what Joseph Tural says about digital media on page 159. It seems stupid, but I'll read it anyway. Digital media, devices with computer processors that allow access to textual, audio, and visual material. Devices with computer processors that allow access to textual, audio, or visual material. Okay? Now, this certainly, just superfluous. I mean, there's no great need to go over this, but just because it is a 101 class, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page here. Of course, digital media is stuff that has to do with digital media, right? The internet, the World Wide Web, social media forms, streaming, iPhone devices, music downloadable stuff, all of that is digitized, okay? It is all available in one click of a mouse pad or one click on your phone. We will talk about this in the last chapter when we talk about the internet and the differences between analog and digital. We talked a little bit about the differences between analog and digital 25, 30 years ago, and most of the 20th century. Analog allowed you to enjoy media sort of in and of itself one at a time. So, for instance, if I listened to a record when I was a teenager, I had to go to a store to buy the record. And I took that record and put it on my turntable at home and listened to that record and that record only. And there was nothing else I could do with that record. I couldn't download it. I couldn't convert it into any other kind of material. The same with when I went to a movie theater to see a movie on a screen, and it was celluloid film and it went through a projector. It was an analog technology made of not digital technology, but analog, organic, of the earth, silver bromide crystals that would explode in a dark room and make film was a representation of real life, right? If you wanted to watch television, you watched television and you turned it on and the signals through the air would be picked up electronically, and electrophotographic abilities of your television to reproduce that picture. And until VCRs came along, you saw it once and that was it. If you didn't see it, you didn't see it. It was beamed to your television for that moment and that moment only. Okay? That's analog technology. You have grown up with technology that converts all of that into digitation, right? You listen to music digitally. You see movies often digitally. You see the internet as a complete digital sensation, right? Everything you do on the internet is converted, and you then convert it to pictures on your phone and then Instagram and so forth and so on. Yours is all so much more intertwined, and thus we're still in a changing environment from analog to digital. Well, not really, but in terms of the way in which audiences observe it. But prior to that, it was not like this. So digital media, this point that Turow is making, is so evident to you that you don't even think about it, right? But I'm asking you to go back 10 or 15 years to think about the changes between analog and digital. And that, of course, all of these companies have put all of their money, or much of their money, into the digital version of whatever it is they were trying to sell. Okay. Every television show has some sort of digital version. Every magazine has some sort of digital version. Every film is leaning toward a digital version. Okay. This is one of those obvious points that your generation has already lived through, but it's a 101 class. It's a 101 textbook. Obviously, the rise of digital media, or the spread of digital media, I should say, is important to ultimately conglomeration or media power. A fairly evident point made on page 159. 159. The second is the importance of distribution windows. The importance of distribution windows. The importance of distribution windows. Okay. This is one of those examples of a fancy version of a word in an academic setting that allows you to think about this concept that you already understand with a degree of vocabulary. If you were to graduate with a degree in communication or perhaps marketing, if you're going to work for a large company that makes a lot of this kind of content, you would sound very fancy in discussing the notion of distribution windows. Having a command of vocabulary is also part of 101 training. All a distribution window is, on page 160, is, quote, the various exhibition points distributors use to generate revenues for a product. For example, a movie theater, a newspaper, or a cable network. The various exhibition points distributors use to generate revenues for a product. It's just where you get your media, right? That's just a fancy word, or a fancy version of the word distribution windows, okay? And Turow gives a pretty good example of contemporary film, contemporary movies, and how contemporary movies have a kind of multiplicity of distribution windows. Think of it this way, okay? Over on 161, they give a pretty good example of a distribution window. And they give an example of a contemporary film. Contemporary film, when it opens in a movie theater, you go to see it in a movie theater. Okay, that's one window, so to speak. And then after a little while, the movie theater is no longer playing the film. So what happens to the life of that film? What other window is it shown through, so to speak? Well, after a little while, it'll be available on cable television, like HBO or Starz or Showtime. And then after a little while longer, it'll be on video demand on your cable package at home. And after a little while, you may even, if you still have the ability to do so, use it on something called like Redbox, or even stream it on Netflix. Or if you're really old-fashioned, get the old-fashioned Netflix ones that are mailed to you. The DVD is actually mailed to you. Or you can download it onto your computer or your phone or your iPad after a little while. Or after even longer while, it'll play on cable television or maybe even network television. So in other words, remember a couple minutes ago when I was telling you when I was a teenager and you went to see a movie, you had to go to a movie theater, and then when you saw that movie at the movie theater, that was the only place you ever saw it. And occasionally maybe you'd see it on network television, maybe a year later. That was a pretty limited idea of distribution windows. With digital communication, with digital technology, in this example, a motion picture has many distribution windows. It has many ways in which you can access a particular kind of film. And some of you, I'm assuming, are able to find films in any manner of special ways using your fingers and keystrokes on the old interwebs, okay? but that's a much different way in which distribution windows used to work. So there's a wide variety or multiplicities of ways in which to see a particular kind of film. The key for this particular chapter is that conglomerates are banking very heavily on making sure that they soak their film through many distribution windows. Okay, so that film can generate as much profit as it can, well beyond its box office run, its initial box office run in the movies. How it can be downloaded, how it can be shown on television, how it can be shown on cable television, how it can be shown on even airplanes, right? You can see a film on an airplane. That's another distribution window I hadn't thought of, okay? Or even in hotel rooms, okay? So distribution windows allows for a variety of ways for a particular kind of media to be absorbed, okay? And you can pick other forms of media, music or or ways in which you can absorb other kinds of media, okay? Number 3 in the developments for media conglomerates is audience fragmentation and segmentation. Audience fragmentation and segmentation. Okay. So over on page 161, you have the description of channel fragmentation. Channel fragmentation, again, is just a fancy way of saying something I think you probably already realize. Channel fragmentation, is the great increase in the number of mass media outlets. The great increase in the number of mass media outlets that has taken place in the past 2 decades. Excuse me, I had some, I had a little late night snack a little earlier. Kind of got the burps. I'm 56 years old. When I was your age in Philadelphia, where I grew up, there were 3 channels. That was it. ABC, NBC, CBS. Then there was PBS, which was, sort of a national network. And then you had 3 local channels, Channel 17, Channel 29, and Channel 48. That was it. That's all you had, right? And often most of those channels went off at about 1 o'clock in the morning or sometimes even earlier. You have no idea how much the media landscape has changed in terms of what's called channel fragmentation. It just means there's so many things to choose from just on television alone, let alone the ubiquity and pervasiveness of the digital media world, okay? So, and with the growth of all of these, remember, conglomerates are trying their best to hold on to as many of these as possible to generate as much revenue as possible on television, in radio, and in social media and digital media in general, okay? Joseph Turow talks a little bit about how cable television exploded in the 80s and how digital technology exploded in the 90s, well, mainly 2000s, to make the television much more fragmented, okay? There's all kinds of choices on television, and just cable television and even network television. And then you have streaming services that have just changed television forever in a lot of ways, okay? So fragmentation has to do with the growth of the amount of things to choose from, okay? And over on 162, Turow talks about segmentation. And what he says here is producers and distributors try to reach different types of people with content tailored specifically for them. Producers and distributors try to reach different types of people with content specifically tailored for them, okay? So when you have so many more new channels, there's ways to reach the wide variety of audience that's out there, right? So for instance, I don't really like reality television. To me, it's the fakest thing there is. It gets on my nerves. I feel embarrassed for the entire culture whenever I see anything on reality television. However, my wife gets a kick out of some reality television. Some of my friends do too. Just something we disagree about, right? And my daughter likes to watch things, obviously for a 12-year-old, and I don't want to watch those things for a 12-year-old, but I like to watch TV with my daughter. So I'll watch, Camp Kikiwaka with my daughter, but it's specifically tailored for her. It's segmented to that particular part of the population. With channel fragmentation, there's so many more channels, and with channel segmentation, the many, many choices are then segmented or try to be produced for a very, very specific audience, rather than how television used to be such a generalized audience for everybody, right? Now, television is still mainstream, broadcast television is still relatively general. But with the fragmentation of so many different kinds of channels and segmentation, it means they're trying to hit repeat audiences with very, very specified shows, cooking shows, real estate shows, myth-busting shows, science shows, not just cop dramas and sitcoms. I mean, there's so many different kinds of shows. Have you sat and looked at a Netflix queue for a while? Sometimes you can't, you have no idea what you're going to watch. There's so many things to watch, right? That's what we mean by segmentation and fragmentation. Fragmentation is there's plenty to choose from, and segmentation means trying to hit to a very, very specific demographic audience, okay? And of course, for media companies who own much of this, there's not that many media companies that own a lot of this culture. What that means is they're trying their best to get as much money out of every particular viewer as possible. And these are some of the guidelines for contemporary rationale for media conglomerates. Okay. And Turow gives a pretty good example of some of this stuff on those first few pages. Okay. Number four is something called globalization. Globalization. And on page 163, Turow talks about globalization. Okay. He defines it simply. I think you can understand it. The movement of media content around the world. The movement of media content around the world. Okay. That's not hard to figure out, right? Globalization, right? Trying to make as much money with media content, not just in America, but all around the world. Okay. Disney's quite good at this because they're getting larger and larger and larger over the past handful of years. And plus, their stories are often for children, and the stories are relatively simplistic and fun and powerful for little kids. But they also have the theme parks, and they have theme parks all over the world. Although with some success, some not so successful. But Disney's very, very good at that. Trying to not just limit the market to the United States, but to sell it to around the world. That's part of globalization. That doesn't take a genius to figure that out. And on 165, he talks ultimately about this idea of conglomeration. It's a funny word, conglomerate. CONGLOMERATION. And what he discusses there is he says that a mass media conglomerate is a company that holds several mass media firms, in different media industries under its corporate umbrella. Mass media conglomerate is a company that holds several mass media firms in different media industries under its corporate umbrella. Okay? And this is, I think the best definition of this is the Disney Corporation. And I think this would be quite useful for you guys in terms of your upcoming papers, which will be due in about a month, maybe even a little less. I'll talk a little bit about that after this lecture is over, but one of your options for your final paper is to just do a small research, 5 pages, not much, double spaced and so forth. Small research paper based upon a conglomerate. That's one of your charges. So again, it has to be, the paper has to have to do with not just cheering for the conglomerate. I don't want something from Disney's website saying how great it is, but you want to explore the power that a conglomerate has and think about its reach, its many media platforms that the general public isn't aware that is owned by one company, whether it's Disney or Viacom or Sony, whatever it is. But generally speaking, that's what most students have done their paper on. Let's take a look at page 166, please, and look at this idea that they describe about the Disney Corporation. Let me show you to it briefly. I'm not so sure how well you can see this on the camera, but this little chart here shows the Disney Corporation at the top, and then it has a lot of other lines and graphs to show just how much Disney owns, right? I'll leave it there for a moment. You can take a look at it. It's my hope that you can see it well enough to see all the corporations that they own. I don't know if you can see that well, right? I'll name some of them. And the point is, not only do they own them, but they're often so well interconnected. I mean, that's really the point. And I don't think most viewers or listeners or readers or consumers realize it. So for instance, the Walt Disney Company is the parent company, the conglomerate. And this is even outdated. I mean, Disney's bought up all the Star Wars stuff in the past few years. But for instance, they own ABC television networks. They own Walt Disney theme parks. They own Hyperion Books. They own Walt Disney Studios. They own ESPN and all stuff that is under ESPN, like ESPN Online, ESPN Radio, ESPN TV networks. They own under Walt Disney Pictures, Disney Music Group, Disney Theatrical Group. And they own Disney and Disneyland in the US, Disneyland Paris and Hong Kong, and Disneyland's cruise lines. And this book is written like 4 or 5 years ago, so this is even it's out of date a little bit. I mean, Disney has bought up all of the Star Wars franchises, and they're making a fortune on them, okay? The general public isn't necessarily aware that they own all that stuff. And the real power comes in not only just owning all of those things individually, but the real power with a conglomerate is how they use all of those other arms to help sell each other. How ABC will sell ESPN, how Hyperion Books will sell the Disney theme parks, how the Disney theme parks will sell the Disney movies, how the Disney store will sell merchandise. All of that stuff works together. That's the point of what a conglomerate can do. A conglomerate is not only just powerful in and of itself, it's powerful helping to reflect those things within the same company to sell the other parts of the company. And that is called synergy. Over on page 166, they talk about this idea called synergy. SYNERGY. It's a cumbersome definition, but I'll read it for you anyway. A situation in which the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And then they say the ability of mass media organizations to channel content into a wide variety of mass media on a global scale through control of production, distribution, and exhibition in as many of those media as possible. So on page 166 of your textbook on the sidebar definition, I'll read it again. A situation in which the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The ability of a mass media organization to channel content into a wide variety of mass media on a global scale through control over production, distribution, and exhibition in as many of those media as possible. So what that means is, synergy means is, it's how ABC can have commercials for Disney Cruise Lines during its broadcast. It's how ESPN can promote Disney-related shows or Disney-related programming or Disney-related movies. And the viewer at home doesn't realize this. They go, oh, that must be popular and good and valuable, without realizing that it's just marketing by the Disney Corporation using many of its arms of ownership to help sell the Disney Corporation, which isn't just Disney. It's ABC, it's ESPN, it's Star Wars, and it's many other things that have to do with this particular ownership. That's the idea of selling the platforms that are owned by the conglomerate itself. And it's the same with Time Warner. It's the same with Disney. It's the same with other conglomerates. Also on page 166, they talk a little bit about Time Warner, Warner Brothers movies. Okay? Synergy describes a situation which the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It is synergy at work when Time Warner's DC Comics provides the characters for Time Warner Brothers movies, excuse me, which in turn provide the inspiration for Batman clothing, when all these elements get publicity through the following: Time Warner's CW broadcast network, Time Warner's TNT, TBS, and CNN cable networks, all of Time Warner's websites and mobile apps, the expressed enthusiasm by target audience on Batman Facebook fan pages, Batman feeds on Twitter, the encouragement of more media attention to Batman as a result of real-time monitoring of these activities by DC Comics and its PR agency. You guys, your generation has really grown up in this era of synergy. Your whole Marvel universe or movie universe that's been popularized by comic book hero movies is all tied into this idea of how a conglomerate can use all of its arsenal to help sell the larger aspect of its own particular media corporation, right? If you have many different companies under one umbrella, you can make a tremendous amount of revenue. And part of the problem for me is just a hack professor, is that it seems to me that so much of the work is put into marketing the actual content rather than the content itself. I mean, what do we know and learn and understand and value from Avengers 3? Maybe we do some, I don't know. But like, it just seems to be a machine, you know? It keeps just making the same kind of movie that doesn't really move you very much or is that interesting. It's there to be sold rather than to be viewed or thought about or cared about. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a crank. I'm not so sure. Okay. But this is just 5 ways in which media conglomerates, who not only own all of these separate entities, but they use them to sell each other. That's really the point. Okay. And they do it without audiences realizing it. I've used this example many times in my Mass Comm 101 class. Like, there's a magazine called Entertainment Weekly that, it's not as successful as it used to be, but it's been a pretty successful magazine for the past 30 years. And that magazine has and had pretty good critics who were working on everything in the popular culture: television, film, radio, magazines, newspapers, theater, books, whatever. And these people would chart each week what the popular culture was giving us. And for the most part, in my view, they were pretty good. They were pretty honest and generally pretty on the nose in terms of how it is that they were charting the various forms of popular culture, whether it was television, film, radio, etc. But what the audience doesn't really understand is that Time Warner owns Entertainment Weekly, right? So Time Warner products that are films or television or websites or what have you, they're really carefully analyzed to make sure that they're pretty good, right? So when the audience doesn't really know that, and they keep seeing in one version of this particular magazine that Time Warner products are all pretty well favorable, and maybe some of the Disney ones aren't, and maybe some of the Sony ones aren't, and maybe some of the rival companies aren't given as the same level of critical evaluation that they could, or more critical evaluation, I should say, then the audience of that magazine starts to think, well, it must be only Time Warner things that are good. I mean, that's not criticism, then that's marketing. You see what I mean? In other words, you can't come to trust that. I mean, the Harry Potter kid was on the cover of that magazine 1,000,000 times because of the successful film franchise and the successful book franchise of Harry Potter. But the general public doesn't realize that Harry Potter is a franchise owned by Time Warner, or at least the films are. So when that happens, it's a calculation that's what the calculation that the viewer or the reader must make. How do we trust Entertainment Weekly with media criticism when the very company that owns them is responsible for much of the media? And is it only their things that are any good? You'd have to have some sort of a critical viewpoint, thinking critically a little bit more about what's happening in our culture, because it's they that are giving it to us, right? And when they're giving it to us and there's only 6 or 8 companies that control the entire popular culture, that means they're controlling everything you have access to in terms of entertainment and, more importantly, public opinion. What is deemed valuable in the culture, what is deemed interesting in the culture, what is deemed as worthy in the culture is really dictated by, like Mickey Mouse, and it's something we should think about in terms of how it is that we even understand our popular culture. To whose benefit is our popular culture? Well, I enjoy popular culture. I get a kick out of things. I like to be entertained by things. I like to learn things. But they're making a tremendous amount of money, and then they're regurgitating that money all through their many media platforms. That's what conglomeration is about. So I know that some students, when they see this, they think, what's the big deal? It's just good marketing. Well, yeah, it is. It is, but then what is being marketed? What is being learned? What is being absorbed? What is being understood? What is being valued in our culture, right? Is it just myth-making? Is it that, Voldemort shall not be named, or the Avengers are going to save the day? I mean, there are no Avengers right now in COVID, right? Right? Batman is not going to save us from COVID-19. Do you know what I mean? We need scientists to save us from COVID-19. We need us to save us from COVID-19. Not, the Avengers or Batman and Robin or, whatever, those other guys. And at any rate, a couple of things in terms of what we have for the rest of the semester. So it's so weird. I don't know if you're having this sensation. I feel like the days go so slowly and then the weeks flow by. I can't even believe it's going to be April 20th in a day or so. There's not that many classes left. We're more or less finished with this very short chapter, and then we have to do the internet chapter, which is the very next couple pages, 168 through 190. Okay, and the internet chapter, I will discuss some stuff that's actually not in the chapter, stuff that has to do with the chapter, stuff that's not within the chapter, a little bit of the history of the internet, where it came from, and how powerful it is. The finals are coming up, and we will discuss that. What you're responsible for. The final exam will be very similar to the first 2 exams. It's not cumulative, except for one question. There's one big, fat, juicy question at the end that is cumulative, but the final exam will be everything from the last exam forward. In other words, the material from the last exam forward, but not cumulative the entire semester, except for one question. Okay? And I will send you information in an email as to when the final absolutely has to be in. Okay? And I haven't heard from 101 or 101 section 1 or 101 section 2 a lot, because we haven't had anything to hand in for a little while. It's my hope that you're making sure you get all this done. First, it's my hope that everyone's safe. I have had a handful of students who have been stricken with COVID, and so far, everyone, as far as I understand, are okay, but they're getting through it as best they can. And some family members have had COVID, and it's been very, very sad and very, very difficult. But so far, everyone's been getting through it or has gotten through it already. So just do your best. Please be diligent. Please be diligent. If you have to leave the house, please make sure that you're washing your hands constantly. I mean, constantly. Don't just say, I don't feel like doing this anymore. Don't get fed up with it. You can't, Connecticut is probably going to be at its peak in another week or so. And then even when it's at its peak, it doesn't necessarily mean it's over. This is going to be a long haul. So I will be in touch in terms of when the finals are. But remember, you have to do a final paper, 5-page research paper as best you can do it on either a subject that you find interesting or numbers 1 and 2 on that paper topic thing I handed out to you beforehand. And if you have questions about it, please email me. The key is staying in touch. You have to stay in touch with me. Okay? Also, please be checking your NCC email addresses. As I've mentioned several times, I do not have everyone's personal email. It just wasn't in the cards by the time we stopped classes. I only have your Banner given, NCC given email addresses. I think there's an easy way for you to link your email to your NCC email to your personal email. I'm not exactly certain how to do it because I can't do it. I'm a faculty member. But please try to do that to make sure, because I really can't afford at the end of the semester, if I haven't heard from you, I'm going to have to give you an incomplete. That's just the way it is. I mean, and by the way, guys, clean out your voicemail messages. Get them ready on your cell phones. There's a handful of you out there. I'm not sure if it's this class or I have 5 classes, so I'm not sure. If I can't reach you on the phone, I mean, I can't even leave a message. Some people don't have their voicemail boxes set up. Some people don't ever look at their voicemail messages and clean it out. I thought you guys lived on your phones. Like, I thought your phones were always, they're always in your laps in class. So, I do my best to make sure everyone's, I know these are tough times. I know these are unprecedented times, and a lot of people are either working a lot of hours in their jobs. God bless you if you're an essential worker. But if you don't get in touch with me, I have no way of knowing what's going on, okay? Also, I'm not so sure that if you're aware of this, but I have to give you a regular grade, A, B, C, D, or F, by whatever it is, May, whatever. I'm not even sure. I'll have to look that up. Probably around the 20th or 22nd or something. But apparently you have the option of choosing whether or not you want that grade to stand or taking the class pass-fail after I already give you a grade. But you only have a certain amount of time to change your mind. Now, I think this will affect people who do really poorly in the class. So you just keep that in mind as we move forward. I think you might have gotten an email from administration about this. I will look to find the old email that I got not long after this occurred. But I believe you'll have till the middle of June or sometime in June to change your mind if you want that C or D or F to change into a pass. I'm not sure how that's going to affect your CUME, but I think you have that choice. I have to double check on that, but apparently that's what's been happening. The other thing is, it's very important that you remember that we would be right now doing pre-registration for the fall semester. Okay? Now, I have no idea what's going to be happening for the fall semester. I hope and pray we're all back in the classroom, but I don't know for sure. So, still, we need enrollment, right? We need enrollment to stay alive as a college, or there's going to be so many people coming back to community college because it's cheaper, because the economy is going to be in such difficult strains these next months, that you could get a lot of kids from UConn and WestConn and the like, or even maybe some richer kids who go to, like, I don't know, Wesleyan or something, and their parents are like, no, you're going to take your math and your communication and your science classes at NCC this semester. I mean, it could very well be that we get a lot of enrollment because of the difficulty of the economy. In bad economies, community colleges usually grow. All I'm saying is, I know this is really a pain, and I know that you're, probably weirded out like the rest of us, but we need to pre-reg, and I'd be happy to talk with any of you. Please email me. Look at your what's her names, your transcripts and your degree evaluations to see where you stand. What classes you may need, what classes you may want to take. I don't know what you want to take. Okay. Now for the fall, if you're interested in communication arts, we have TV film production, we have journalism, and I'm teaching 2 film studies courses. One is called American Film, where you watch films. It's just once a week. You watch films, and I talk for an hour, then you watch a film. And the American Film class is a 100 level class. It's called COM 157, and it's all independent cinema. We discuss independent cinema, all American independent cinema. Okay, that's on Tuesdays from 1 to 4:15. It only meets once a week, 1 to 4:15. You watch movies. And on Thursdays, I teach another film class called COM 256, Focus on the Director. And that is a class in what's called auteur filmmakers. It's like famous movie makers over the years. And it's the same idea. I talk for about an hour and change, then we see a film, and then we discuss it. Okay? That's Focus on the Director, COM 256, this fall on Thursdays. Communication Arts 157, American Film on Tuesdays. Plus, I'm teaching Mass Comm 101 again forever. Okay? Those are the courses I'm teaching. But we also have a journalism course and TV film production courses where you learn how to make films and work in a television studio. That's going to be happening in the fall too. Now, I'd be happy to try to advise you what classes you need either for communication or if you need a math or science or your liberal arts, whatever electives you need. But you have to tell me. I can't come to your houses and do this for you, or I can't yell you in class to come see me. Like, I know you're thinking this is such a weird time, but like, if we don't have decent numbers in the spring for the fall, I don't know what's going to happen in the fall. So it could be we have so little numbers that classes get canceled, or it could be we're overwhelmed with people coming from UConn. I really don't know. I'm unprecedented, but you still have the ability to pre-register for classes, and I really, 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 really insist that you think about it and email me, okay? And I'd be happy to help you, even if it has to do with my class. I'd be happy to help with anything, right? We need decent numbers for the fall semester. It's really, really important. Also, I'm teaching a summer film class, the same one that's being offered in the fall, COM 256, one of them, COM 256. I'm also being offered this summer, but I've just been told recently that it's all online. So it may be a little different. You may have to watch the films on your own. But I am teaching it. I'm offering it. Whether it goes or not, I don't know. But it looks like I'm going to have to learn how to use Blackboard. And I guess I can do supplemental stuff with YouTube. But it looks like I'm going to have to teach that class through Blackboard this summer if you're interested in taking it. It is a decent way to get 3 credits very quickly. It's a 200 level class. For those of you who may need a 200 level class in communication, because sometimes you have to take upper level classes. And you're watching movies much of the time. Okay, it's not even 4 full weeks. Okay, so it doesn't look like we're going to meet in the classroom because we're still worried about COVID-19. But I am offering it, and there's also a journalism class that's being offered for those of you who may be interested in journalism. I'm not sure if it's going to go either, but it's being offered. I implore you to go to our webpage. First, look at the part where it says academics. You click on that, and then you look at course search. You click on that, and it shows all the courses that are being offered. Also, we'll say for some snafu, every communication arts course that's offered, where it says faculty for every one of them, it just says staff. That's just because we're behind. I'm teaching the film courses, and there's also a media writing course that's being offered, and a digital journalism course that's being offered for the fall. Right? They're staffed. We have staff for them. It's not just anybody. It's just a screw up that we didn't get a chance to get everyone's name on the fall schedule. So it's there. Okay. So just keep that in mind. Please email me any questions, or even if you just haven't emailed me in a while and you saw this and like, I don't know if you guys are actually watching these things, right? So just email me back saying, yeah, I got 101. I got it. I'm there, Shields. And just indicate who you are and what class you're in. It's another thing. People keep emailing me saying, Shields, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I remember this person, but which class are they talking about? Like, you have to say, hi, it's Jane Smith or Joe Smith, COM 101, Section 1, COM 101, Section 2, then go. So I can figure out who you are, because I have over 100 students. You can't just say, hey, it's me, it's my thing. I need to know something, because I'm not sure. I have over 100 students. It's hard to keep track. Plus, I have about 10 million emails. But send me an email. Say, yeah, I got it. I got 101. I'm on track. I understand. Or don't wait till the last minute, because it's not like a normal classroom time, okay? So this is for 101, Section 1, 101, Section 2, for April 20th and 21st. I wish you all the best happiness. If there's anybody out there who's been touched by COVID in your family, friends, or yourselves, my thoughts and prayers go out to you and your family. My thoughts and prayers go out to your mental health. My thoughts and prayers go out to your sense of yourself, how you're doing, how you're feeling. We're all in this together. So just, and I think also, like me, you have to kind of change your thought process about your computer use at your house, because you're so used to just playing when you had your computer time, your Facebook, your Instagram, your first person shooter games, or whatever you do. So actually sitting down to do the day-to-day 12 or 15 credits of work on the computer, I know it's hard, it's a pain. So you have to change and work with that attitude for a little while. And if you are healthy, I'm so glad that you are, but man, you have to keep yourself in a mental state that says, thank God I'm healthy, because the handful of people that I know that have gotten this thing, it's really, really bad. I mean, just thank God they're making their way through it, but even making their way through it, it's really bad. So when you're really feeling down and you're really feeling depressed or just thrown off or whatever, if you're doing healthy, that's everything. Okay, so just keep that in mind. That's what I keep telling myself when I'm bored out of my mind, or if I'm just like blue about something. I just try to think, okay, Shields, you're not a young man. If you get this, God knows what could happen to you. So, and man, be diligent. Be diligent. Wipe stuff down. Even if you just have like any little bit of alcohol or something, rubbing alcohol or whatever, Clorox, just keep wiping stuff down. Do not take it for granted, okay? All right, that's it for this evening. Email me with any questions. It's only about 12 pages, but there's a lot of information in that 10, 12 pages, so keep that in mind. And the next week when we talk, we'll be doing essentially our last chapter and working our way toward the final paper, okay? Thanks. Have a good evening. Stay safe.